वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदानन्दन व्रज जनरञ्जन यशोदानन्दन व्रज जनरञ्जन यमुनतीरावनचारि यमुनतीरावनचारि जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय जगन्नाथ जय बलदेवा सुभद्रा माय जय सुदर्शन जय गौरनिताय 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 जय गौरनिताय जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद हरिनाम संकीर्तनम की जय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय नारायणं नमस्कृत्यं नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवयां भगवती उत्तमश्लोके भक्तेर्भवति नैष्टकी। Hare Krishna, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, chapter number 22, verse number 24. Ritu Maharaj's meeting with the four Kumaras. अहिंसया पारमहंस्यचर्यया स्मृत्या मुकुन्दाचरिताग्रयसीदुना यमैरकामै नियमैश्चाप्यनिन्दया निरीहया द्वन्द्वतितिक्षया च अहिंसया पारमहंस्यचर्यया स्मृत्या मुकुन्दाचरिताग्रयसीदुना यमैरकामै नियमैश्चाप्यनिन्दया निरीहया द्वन्द्वतितिक्षया च अहिंसया पारमहंस्यचर्यया स्मृत्या मुकुन्दाचरिताग्रयसीदुना यमैरकामै नियमैश्चाप्यनिन्द्यया निरीहया द्वन्द्वतितिक्षया च. Word to word translation. Ahimsaya by non-violence, Paramahamsyacharyaya by following in the footsteps of great acharyas, Smritya by remembering, Mukunda, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Acharita Agraya, simply preaching his activities, Siduna by the nectar, Yamai by following regulative principles, Akamai without material desires, Niyamai by strictly following the rules and regulations, Cha also, Api certainly, Anindaya without blaspheming, Nirihaya living simply, plain living, Dvandva duality, Titikshaya by tolerance, Cha and. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. A candidate for spiritual advancement must be non-violent, must follow in the footsteps of great acharyas, must always remember the nectar of the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, must follow the regulative principles without material desire, and while following the regulative principles should not blaspheme others. A devotee should lead a very simple life and not be disturbed by the duality of opposing elements. He should learn to tolerate them. Purport. The devotees are actually saintly persons or sadhus. The first qualification of a sadhu or devotee is ahimsa or non-violence. Persons interested in the path of devotional service or in going home back to Godhead must first practice ahimsa or non-violence. A sadhu is described as titikshava karunika in Srimad Bhagavatam 3.25.21. A devotee should be tolerant and should be very much compassionate towards others. For example, if he suffers personal injury, he should tolerate it. But if someone else suffers injury, the devotee need not tolerate it. The whole world is full of violence, and the devotee's first business is to stop this violence, including the unnecessary slaughter of animals. A devotee is the friend not only of human society but of all living entities, for he sees all living entities as sons of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He does not claim himself to be the only Son of God and allow all others to be killed, thinking that they have no soul. This kind of philosophy is never advocated by a pure devotee of the Lord. Suhrida Sarvadehinam. A true devotee is a friend of all living entities. Krishna claims in Bhagavad Gita to be the father of all species of living entities. Consequently, the devotee of Krishna is always a friend of all. This is called ahimsa. Such non-violence can be practiced only when we follow the footsteps of great acharyas. Therefore, according to our Vaishnava philosophy, we have to follow the great acharyas of the four sampradayas or disciplic successions. Trying to advance in spiritual life outside the disciplic succession is simply ludicrous. It is said, therefore, Acharyavan Purusho Vedaha. One who follows the disciplic succession of acharyas knows things as they are. Chandogya Upanishad 6.14.2. Tadvijnanartam sa gurumeva abhigachet. In order to understand the transcendental science, one must approach the bona fide spiritual master. Mundakopanishad 1.2.12. The word smritya is very important in spiritual life. Smritya means remembering Krishna always. Life should be molded in such a way that one cannot remain alone without thinking of Krishna. We should live in Krishna so that while eating, sleeping, walking, and working, we remain only in Krishna. Our Krishna Consciousness Society recommends that we arrange our living so that we can remember Krishna. In our ISKCON society, the devotees, while engaged in making spiritual sky incense, are also hearing about the glories of the Lord or his devotees. The Shastra recommends Smartavya Satatam Vishnu. Lord Vishnu should be remembered always, constantly. Vismartavyo na jatu chit. Vishnu should never be forgotten. That is a spiritual way of life. Smartya. This remembrance of the Lord can be continued if we hear about him constantly. It is therefore recommended in this verse Mukunda Charitagraya Duna. Sidhu means nectar. To hear about Krishna from Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita or similar authentic literature is to live in Krishna consciousness. Such concentration in Krishna consciousness can be achieved by persons who are strictly following the rules and regulative principles. We have recommended in our Krishna consciousness movement that a devotee chant 16 rounds on beads daily and follow the regulative principles. That will help the devotee to be fixed in his spiritual advancement in life. It is also stated in this verse that one can advance by controlling the senses, yamai. By controlling the senses, one can become a Swami or Goswami. One who is therefore enjoying the super title Goswami or Goswami must be very strict in controlling his senses. Indeed, he must be master of his senses. This is possible when one does not desire any material sense gratification. If by chance the senses want to work independently, he must control them. If we simply practice avoiding material sense gratification, controlling the senses is automatically achieved. Another important point mentioned in this connection is anindaya. We should not criticize others' method of religion. There are different types of religious systems operating under different qualities of material nature. Those operating in the modes of ignorance and passion cannot be as perfect as that system in the mode of goodness. In Bhagavad Gita, everything has been divided into three qualitative divisions. Therefore, religious systems are similarly categorized. When people are mostly under the modes of passion and ignorance, their system of religion will also be of the same quality. A devotee, instead of criticizing such systems, will encourage the followers to stick to their principles so that gradually they can come to the platform of religion in goodness. Simply by criticizing them, a devotee's mind will be agitated. Thus, a devotee should tolerate and learn to stop agitation. Another feature of the devotee is nirihaya, simple living. Niriha means gentle, meek, or simple. A devotee should not live very gorgeously and imitate a materialistic person. Plain living and high thinking are recommended for a devotee. He should accept only as much as he needs to keep the material body fit for the execution of devotional service. He should not eat or sleep more than is required. Simply eating for living and not living for eating and sleeping only 6 to 7 hours a day are principles to be followed by devotees. As long as a body is there, it is subjected to the influence of climatic changes, diseases, and natural disturbances, the threefold miseries of material existence. We cannot avoid them. Sometimes we receive letters from neophyte devotees questioning why they have fallen sick. Although pursuing Krishna consciousness, they should learn from this verse that they have to become tolerant. Dvandva titikshaya. This is a world of duality. One should not think that because he has fallen sick, he has fallen from Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness can continue without impediment from any material opposition. Lord Sri Krishna therefore advises in Bhagavad Gita 2.14, Tam titikshasva bharata. My dear Arjuna, please try to tolerate all these disturbances. Be fixed in your Krishna conscious activities. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपः कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरोन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगणा रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनासहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणा ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नामिने गौरत्विषे नमः। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धु दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपीश गोपिका कान्त राधा कान्त नमोऽस्तुते तप्त काञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. We welcome all devotees for today morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. So today we are discussing on the topic of fourth canto, chapter number 22, verse number 24. So although I am very unqualified to speak on such an elevated topic, on the topic that describes about the qualities that a Vaishnava should have, I, by the instructions of senior devotees, make a humble attempt for the glorification of the Lord, Vaishnavas, and the purification of my heart. I once again seek blessings of all devotees assembled here, so I can speak representing Guru Parampara without any mental speculation. So in this verse, verse number 24 of 22nd chapter, where Prithu Maharaj is meeting with the four Kumaras. So the background is that the four Kumaras have blessed Prithu Maharaj with their wonderful association. So in the previous chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Vishnu, when he gave darshan to Prithu Maharaj, he blessed Prithu Maharaj by saying that in the future he will become fortunate by getting the association of his pure devotees. That is the Sanat Kumaras. And here in this chapter, we are seeing how Prithu Maharaj is receiving these four Kumaras with royal reception. And Prithu Maharaj has questioned the four Kumaras of what is the ultimate good for people who are suffering in the material world. And Sanat Kumaras here, Sanaka, Sanatana, Sanandana, and Sanat Kumaras, who are the divine sons of Brahmaji, are answering these questions. So they start with saying that Prithu Maharaj already knows the answers, but it is a quality of a sadhu to inquire about spiritual knowledge. And thus they are speaking to Prithu Maharaj about what makes a living entity in this world fortunate. So initially in the previous verse, they spoke about previous two verses. They have spoken about the execution of devotional service by practicing which a living entity can make himself fortunate. And in this verse, they are adding certain qualities that makes devotional service more pleasing to the Supreme Lord. So in this verse, the four Kumaras are mentioning about the qualification that is required for a candidate for spiritual advancement. The qualities that are spoken here are ahimsa, that is non-violence. One must follow in the footsteps of great acharyas. Always remember the nectarian pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Must follow the regulative principles without any material desire. And while following the regulative principles, one should not offend or blaspheme others. One should lead a very simple life and not be disturbed by the duality of the material world, which one should learn to tolerate. So Srila Prabhupada has given an exhaustive purport explaining in depth about all these qualities. So let us try to extract some gems from these purports. So here Srila Prabhupada starts with saying about the first quality, that is ahimsa. The first qualification of a sadhu or a devotee is ahimsa, non-violence. So generally non-violence is understood to be not hurting others. uh, from a gross perspective, not causing physical harm to any living entity, and from a subtler perspective, to not even offend any living entity mentally. But Srila Prabhupada's explanation of non-violence goes deeper in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna is speaking about the 26 items of knowledge. Lord Krishna also mentions about ahimsa. And there, in that purport, Srila Prabhupada defines ahimsa as not arresting the spiritual progress of a living entity. So, ahimsa means what? Real ahimsa means to show compassion to a living entity so that the living entity can elevate its consciousness and progress towards the Supreme Lord. If we do not help a living entity to progress in its consciousness, in its Krishna consciousness, then inadvertently we are involving ourselves in himsa. Because real ahimsa means to encourage the spiritual progress of a living entity. And when we are not doing that, we are involuntarily involving in himsa. So this is a very deep definition, because if we see what is basically himsa, himsa is not only causing harm to a living entity. Himsa also means that the living entity, as long as it stays in the material world, is also afflicted by Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadi, Adhyatmika, Adi Bhautika, Adi Daivika, Klesha. So these seven things, and also affected by Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, and Matsarya, which are the six enemies of the living entity, and also by the six whips, thirst, hunger, and so on. So even if a living entity is not being harmed physically by anybody else, the living entity is prone to so much harm simply by existing in the material world. So simply by existing in the material world, because of the nature of having a material body, even though the living entity is not subjected to any physical harm by another living entity, it is inadvertently subjected to some harm, some himsa. So real ahimsa means to help the living entity come out of this himsa also. This himsa of wanting to undergo birth, death, old age, disease. This himsa of being forced to adhyatmika, adibhautika, adidaivika klesha. The torture of the six enemies, kama, krodha, lobha, moha, mada, and matsarya. And therefore, a devotee always thinks and understands that real ahimsa means to elevate the consciousness of the living entity to perform devotional service to the Supreme Lord, thereby all the material himsa that the living entity is facing can be overcome. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada perfectly defines ahimsa as elevating the consciousness of the living entity to attaining the Supreme. Even in the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna speaks about Daivi Sampada, Srila Prabhupada qualifies ahimsa as elevating the consciousness of a living entity to perform devotional service to the Supreme Lord. And this is a primary quality of a sadhu. And the other qualities of a sadhu are mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 25th chapter, 21st sloka. Lord Kapila speaks about the glories of his devotees, where he says, Titikshava karunika suhrada sarvadehinam ajata shatrava shanta sadhavo sadhubhushanam. He speaks about these wonderful qualities. Titikshava, karunika. No matter what torture is inflicted upon a devotee or a sadhu, he is always tolerant. And not only is he tolerant, even while undergoing that difficulty, he is also compassionate. So we see Srila Prabhupada took so much trouble. 70-year-old sannyasi who could have stayed in Vrindavan performing his bhajan. Vrindavan is a perfect place for anyone to perform bhajan and devotional service to the Supreme Lord. But Srila Prabhupada, in the age of 70, in a cargo ship, actually took trouble on himself. And for what? for elevating the consciousness of all living entities. So to give Krishna consciousness to those people who are the most fallen in the world. So Srila Prabhupada had this compassion, and that is a quality of a sadhu. Titikshava Karunika Suhrida Sarva Dehinam. And Srila Prabhupada very beautifully explains in this purport that a devotee not only shows compassion to human beings but also to every living entity. So the idea of being compassionate to a particular sect, particular community, particular nationality is all self-centeredness. So all kind of isms in this world, whether they are capitalisms, communism, or even Hinduism, whatever it is, are all bordered by certain things. They have a selfish core and they are bordered by certain limitations. Even if one is very broad-minded person or is an altruist, altruism as we say, which means he loves entire humanity, still he tends to harm other living entities by actually killing them and uh, harming them for personal sense gratification. Correct, right? We observe this in this world. So in this world, no matter what philosophy we take, all material designations have certain limitations. But Srila Prabhupada is saying real compassion and real love should not have any boundaries. Should not have any boundaries, because the living entity who is dear to the Supreme Lord also considers all other living entities also in relation to the Supreme Lord, and therefore such a person is able to see every living entity in relation to Krishna, and therefore he behaves as a ultimate, as a well-wisher of all living entities, because he is a representative of the Supreme Lord, and therefore he becomes Suhrida Sarva Dehinam. Dehi means embodied living entity. Whether he is in the body of a human being, he is in the body of an animal, he is in the body of a plant, or no matter what species it is, a devotee is Suhrida Sarva Dehinam, is a very dear friend for all living entities. And because a devotee is a very dear friend of all living entities, he does no harm to anybody. Otherwise, in any other kind of philosophical understanding, in any other kind of material understanding, there is a core of people who are recipients of a person's compassion, but there are others who become who receive that person's hatred or envy, who become the recipients of person's envy. So innocent animals are killed. But here Srila Prabhupada says a devotee not only advocates love for all humanity, but for all living entities in general. So a devotee is a friend not only of human society, but of all living entities. For he sees all living entities as sons of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in purport also, Srila Prabhupada says, he does not claim himself to be the only son of God and allow others to be killed, thinking that they have no soul. This kind of philosophy is never advocated by a pure devotee. Suhridam Sarva Dehinam. A true devotee is a friend of all living entities. See, this is seen in relation to Krishna consciousness only, because Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Aham sarvasya prabho mattah sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvita. The entire material cosmic manifestations and the spiritual worlds are emanating from the Lord. And the Lord goes to say, Aham bija pradapitah. I am the seed giving father for all living entities. And therefore, a devotee who has awakened Krishna consciousness in his heart sees every living entity in relation to the Supreme Lord. So therefore, there is no possibility for a living entity for causing any himsa or any harm to any other living entity. Now, ahimsa is a very high standard actually, because general definition of ahimsa means what? To not harm any other living entity. But a Vaishnava understanding of ahimsa means to endeavor for the spiritual consciousness, for elevation of spiritual consciousness of all living entities. And this was Srila Prabhupada's mood also. Srila Prabhupada took every opportunity to dispense mercy to every living entity, regardless of what their background was. And this ahimsa is arising out of the love for the Supreme Lord. And how will this genuine ahimsa arise in the heart of the devotee? When that devotee follows the instructions of Guru Parampara and follows the orders of the previous Vaishnava Acharyas, then that devotee can become compassionate and can share his compassion with others. So unless a devotee follows in the footsteps of previous acharyas, he cannot express this genuine compassion for all other living entities. And that is where the second quality of a devotee comes. Although in this verse, we are seeing multiple qualities: ahimsa, following in the footsteps of previous acharyas, remembering the glories of the Supreme Lord, uh, following the regulative principles, and while following the regulative principles, not offending any devotees. Although if we see from a bird's eye view that these don't have any relation, but if we carefully observe them, the basis of one quality is another quality. Here ahimsa is arising out of compassion for all living entities, and that compassion arrives in the heart of a living entity when he performs devotional service through the execution of instructions of previous Vaishnava acharyas. And there comes our second aspect of this particular verse, where Srila Prabhupada says that such non-violence can be practiced only when we follow the footsteps of great acharyas. Therefore, according to our Vaishnava philosophy, we have to follow the great acharyas of four sampradayas or disciplic successions. So, why is it important to follow the previous acharyas even to understand the aspect as simple as ahimsa? I will give you an example. There was an occasion of a particular society that was trying to distribute food for unprivileged people. This is a so-called philanthropic activity that they were trying to do in whatever understanding that they had. And what were they doing? They were distributing meat and killed animals as a means of fulfilling the hunger of these so-called unprivileged people. So in the name of distributing food, what were they basically doing? They were causing ahimsa. But what were they trying to achieve? So they were causing himsa. So what were they trying to achieve? They were trying to achieve ahimsa, but inadvertently they were causing himsa. And this is exactly what happens if we try to define qualities on our own without proper Vaishnava understanding. And because the people of this certain organization did not have proper Vaishnava understanding, and they did not follow the instructions of previous acharyas, even in an attempt to act philanthropically, they were causing harm to other living entities. Even in an act that they were wanting to be non-violent, they were causing violence because they don't have proper guidance of a Vaishnava. And that is where, even to understand a simple aspect as simple as ahimsa, one needs proper guidance, and especially guidance in Vaishnava philosophy. One should follow the great acharyas of four sampradayas or disciplic successions. So for one to actually elevate in any aspect of material life, not only spiritual life, even if one wants to elevate in any aspect of material life, one needs to receive proper training. For example, let us say one wants to be a good businessman. What should one do? One should join as an apprentice to another businessman, and under him one should be trained in how to handle accounts, how to handle finances, how to handle stock, how to take audit. All of this one should get trained. Correct, right? So if one tries to do business on one's own, one may learn these things on one's own, but it will take many years or many decades for that matter. But if one joins as an apprentice to another businessman, so he can learn all of this under his training. So what is easier thing? The easier thing is to join as an apprentice to another businessman. Similarly, if we try to transcend the material world on the strength of our fruitive activities, on the strength of our ability for mental speculation, on the strength of our penances, then millions of lifetimes will pass, but we will not even be able to transcend the material world. Forget about coming closer to the understanding of God, even in his Brahman aspect or Paramatma aspect or Bhagavan aspect. Right? So therefore, if we have to progress in greater speed in Krishna consciousness, we should adhere to Shabda Brahman, that is coming from the lotus mouth of pure devotees. And by executing their instructions, what is unachievable for a sadhaka in millions of lifetimes becomes achievable for him in simply one lifetime by adhering to the instructions of previous Vaishnavacharyas. Because these previous Vaishnavacharyas have awakened their relationship with the Supreme Lord, and they are in complete union in terms of the desire with the Supreme Lord. And because they understand the heart of the Supreme Lord, by serving them and by taking their guidance, we also can start serving the Supreme Lord. And only then the qualities of ahimsa and others arise in the devotee, because that is based on compassion the devotee has for all living entities. And for that compassion to arise, one should execute Vaidhi sadhana bhakti under the instructions of pure devotees. And Vaidhi sadhana bhakti means to perform devotional service uh, by adhering to rules and regulations as given in the scriptures. And that takes us to the third and fourth aspect of this particular verse, where Sanat Kumaras are saying that a devotee should remember the Supreme Lord and follow regulative principles. If we read all Vedic literatures, all the four Vedas, six Vedangas, 108 Upanishads, 18 Puranas, Itihasas, all of that, all the rules and regulations mentioned in any Veda whatsoever are subordinate to two simple principles. We have heard so many instructions in lectures. We read Itihasas, Puranas, we hear from Vedic literatures. So, all the regulations, rituals, practices, adherences mentioned in these literatures are subordinate to two simple principles. And what are they? Smartavyam satatam Vishnur Vismartavyam najatu chit Sarve vidhi nishedeyor vettiyo eva kinkara. Sarve vidhi nishedeyor, which means all regulations, and nisheda means don'ts. So all regulations, all do's and don'ts mentioned in the scriptures are subordinate to these two principles. What are they? Smartavyam satatam Vishnur, which means always remember Krishna, and Vismartavyam na jatuchit, never forget Krishna. So these two simple principles are the basis for any regulation. So when we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, when we are chanting the holy names of the Lord, what are we doing? We are executing the Bhagavata Vidhi, which means to always remember Krishna. See, this is the beauty of Vaishnava Acharyas, the kind of mercy that they have bestowed on us. Now, we are just told from the Vedas that we should always remember Krishna and we should never forget Krishna. Now, how do we always remember Krishna and how do we never forget Krishna? To actually investigate this, if we read the Vedic literatures and study on our own, it may be very difficult for us, because the glories of the holy names are very hidden. It requires a Vaishnava to actually pull out these gems and to tell us that the glories of the holy name, Srimad Bhagavatam. Because if we read any other Purana, apart from Srimad Bhagavatam or any other Vedic literature, they emphasize on Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. For example, there are certain pastimes hearing which one may get wealth. There are certain stories or certain histories hearing which one may actually get a son. Like that, there are blessings, Falashruti given. Correct, right? Which means the Vedas are actually giving material, fulfilling material desires in a dharmic way. But not all of them actually glorify the devotional service as ultimately as what Srimad Bhagavatam does. Other Vedic literatures actually emphasize on Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. But Srimad Bhagavatam, in the very second verse, says Dharma projita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam. So Srimad Bhagavatam roots out all kinds of fake religions that encourages aspiration for sense gratification, obligation to forefathers, or moksha, aspiration for liberation, and all of this, which actually cannot give ultimate good for living entity. So Srimad Bhagavatam speaks about the fifth Purushartha, that is Prema. Prema Pumarto Mahan. And that Vaishnava Acharyas have told us. Vaishnava Acharyas have given us this Vidhi of Bhagavat Vidhi and Pancharatra Vidhi, by which we can fulfill the execution of these two principles. That is Smartavyam Satatam Vishnur and Vismartavyam Najatachit. On our own, we would never be able to execute these two principles. Always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. But our Acharyas have given us an elaborate program by which we can, through the Bhagavat Vidhi, always remember Krishna, and through Pancharatra Vidhi, never forget Krishna. Through Bhagavat Vidhi, by studying Srimad Bhagavatam, chanting the holy names of the Lord, by doing Sankirtan, by attending Mangalarati, by associating with devotees, by serving Vaishnavas, what happens? we can remember the Supreme Lord. And for us to never forget the Supreme Lord, because we are involved in worldly activities in the execution of our duties, Acharyas have also given us Pancharatra Vidhi, which is worship of the deities, offering bhoga to the deities, cooking for the deities, even earning Lakshmi and giving in donation to the deities. Hmm? So all of this is Pancharatra Vidhi. So the principles are mentioned in the Vedas, that is Smartavyam Satatam Vishnur, Vismartavyam na Jatachit. But Vaishnava Acharyas have written elaborate literatures such as Upadeshamrita to explain to us how we can always remember Krishna through following Bhagavad Vidhi and how we can never forget Krishna by following the Pancharatra Vidhi. But for us, to remember Krishna is not a spontaneous activity currently. Correct, right? For us to remember Krishna is not a spontaneous activity. And that is where comes the fourth aspect of the verse, that is to follow regulative principles as prescribed by the Vaishnava Acharyas. So for us, for many lifetimes of contamination, our dormant our Krishna consciousness has been covered. So for us to uncover so many unnecessary contaminations that we have accumulated for many millions of lifetimes, we have to practice Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, because what is actually spontaneous for a living entity has been lost, I mean not lost, has been covered by our continuous metal contamination for millions of lifetimes. Now if we have to practice Krishna, if we have to awaken the dormant Krishna consciousness within us, which is actually spontaneous, we have to start. For example, whenever I'll give you an example. So when we are turning on the motor, and when the motor does not have water, what should we do? We generally do something called as priming. What is priming? We add water into the motor so that that water, when comes in contact with the water of the well, can actually pull the water of the well above. Correct, right? Otherwise, the air gap will actually cause inconsistencies and the water cannot be pulled up. So similarly, for us to perform Krishna consciousness in the spontaneous way, in the Raganuga platform, we should first practice Krishna consciousness in the Vaidhi sadhana way, which means adhering to rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness. So Vaishnava Acharyas have given us 64 regulative principles. Adhering to the instructions of spiritual master, surrendering to the spiritual master, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, chanting the holy name, serving Vaishnavas, offering worship to Tulsi Maharani, worshipping the deities, circumambulating the deities. Celebrating festivals, like that 64 regulative principles Vaishnava Acharyas have given us, so that by practicing these principles day in and day out, the dormant Krishna consciousness within us can be awakened. It is actually spontaneous, but for us who have been in material contamination for millions of lifetimes, to perform it in the platform of spontaneous love is not possible. So therefore we have to adhere to regulative principles of Krishna consciousness. So by practicing these principles of Krishna consciousness, what can happen? We can remember Krishna, and by remembering Krishna, what happens? We will be able to execute the instructions of spiritual master and follow the footsteps of spiritual master, where real compassion arises, and through that real compassion we can actually exhibit ahimsa, that is to elevate the consciousness of all living entities so that they can arise in the platform of Krishna consciousness. But for us to execute the regulative principles strictly, there is one thing that we need to do, and that brings us to the fifth aspect of this verse, that is controlling our senses. So unless we control our senses, we cannot execute the regulative principles. And how do we control our senses? We control our senses by engaging in the service of Supreme Lord. See, these are mutually supportive things. It is not that only when we can completely control our senses, then only we should start serving the Supreme Lord. No. An intelligent devotee understands that senses cannot be controlled on our own. Senses cannot be controlled on our own. So what should a devotee do? A devotee should engage these senses in the service of the Supreme Lord, by which the Lord, who is Rishikesha, the controller of all the senses, he can engage these senses, and therefore our senses can be engaged. And for any devotee to actually be called as a Vaishnava, first he should rise to a platform of Goswami. Srila Prabhupada writes to the purport of Upadeshamrita that the first thing in spiritual life is to actually control the senses. And a devotee knows the best way to control the senses is to engage it in the service of the Lord. And that's why Kulashekara Alvar says, Jihve kirtaya keshavam muraripum cheto bhaja sridharam panidvandva samarchaya chutakata shrotram dayam tachrunum krishnam lokaya lochana dvaya harer gachangri yugmalayam jigragrana mukunda pada tulasi murdhanya madhokshajam. So Kulashekara Alvar says, Jihve Keshava Kirtayam. With the tongue, what should we do? We should chant the glories of the Lord. Muraripum Cheto Bhaja Sridharam. And what should we do with the mind? With our consciousness, we should worship the Supreme Lord. We should meditate on the Supreme Lord. Pani Dvandva Samarchayachyuta Kata. Means we should, through the hands, to the two hands, worship the Supreme Lord in his deity form. Samarchayachyuta Kata Shrotvam Dvayam Tachshunam. And we should hear the glories of the Supreme Lord, Krishna Katha, with our two ears. Krishnam Lokaya Lochana Dvaya Harer. The Divya Mangala Vigraha of the Supreme Lord, the beautiful transcendental form of the Supreme Lord, we should receive through the sense of sight. Krishnam Lokaya Lochana Dvaya Harer Gachangri Yugmalayam. With the feet, what should we do? Angri, we should walk to the temple of the Lord. Jigra Grana Mukunda Pada Tulasim. By smelling the tulasi that is offered at the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. And what should we do? We should offer our obeisances, and through the head, we should offer our obeisances to Supreme Lord. In this way, when we engage our senses in the Supreme Lord, we can adhere ourselves strictly to the process of regulative principles of devotional service. And by practicing the regulative principles of devotional service, one rises to Raganuga platform, and then Bhava platform, and then eventually Prema platform. But it all starts with adhering to rules and regulations by following the instructions of spiritual master. And while executing these rules and regulations, we should not involve in blasphemy of others. And this takes us to the sixth value that is mentioned in this, sixth virtue that is mentioned in this verse. That is, by executing regulative principles of devotional service without any material desires and control of the senses, and without blaspheming anybody else or offending anybody else. And in this context of the verse, Srila Prabhupada is specifically speaking about not blaspheming other religious methods. See, we should understand pure devotional service can be attained only by a person who can come in contact with a pure devotee. And by coming in contact with a pure devotee and adhering to his instructions as the life and soul of that particular practitioner, that practitioner can raise to a platform of pure devotee. Now, not all people of the world might come in contact with a pure devotee. So therefore, all people of the world may not be able to get ultimate Krishna consciousness if they don't come in contact with pure devotee. But does that mean that they can fall down to the platform of Vikarma? No. Actually, the Supreme Lord is a very broad person. So he is thinking, it is not only that the living entities who can come in contact with pure devotees attain me, but even those who do not come in contact with my pure devotees should at least be on a standard of religion wherein when they come in contact with a pure devotee, they can take it up very easily. And therefore, the Lord has established, has made arrangement for religious systems in different modes of nature. In the modes of ignorance, in the modes of passion, in the mode of goodness also. Because for one to take to Krishna consciousness, one should at least come to the platform of goodness. And by Sthitam Sattve Prasidate, after coming to the platform of goodness only, one can arise to the platform of Krishna consciousness. But what if one is not in the platform of goodness? So there should be religious systems that can help a person come to the platform of goodness if they are in passion, come to the platform of passion if they are in ignorance. And therefore, there are multiple religious systems in the world, and we should understand that this is a broad plan of the Lord, so that all people of the world, if not today, but tomorrow, can elevate their consciousness to the complete platform of bhakti. But for that, they should adhere to certain religious standard, which may not be ultimate dharma, but to some religious standard, so that they don't fall down to the platform of vikarma. And understanding this, a devotee does not blaspheme them. So see the broad nature of Srila Prabhupada. See, for example, there are Western religions Who could have ever imagined that Western religions, which are generally in the mode of passion and ignorance, could also be understood in a Vaishnava way? Hmm? It is only by the mercy of acharyas such as Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Prabhupada who have given us this vision that even religious systems in the modes of passion and ignorance could be understood in a Vaishnava way and could be seen as a platform wherein people can elevate their consciousness and ultimately become the devotees of the Supreme Lord. Correct, right? So a devotee understanding this does not criticize or unnecessarily blaspheme these religious systems, rather shows his compassion to them by encouraging them to adhere to those religious practices strictly, so that when they adhere to those religious practices strictly, which is also certain form of tapasya, they can actually develop the consciousness of receiving transcendental knowledge when they come in contact with a pure devotee. So pure devotional service can be attained only when one comes in contact with a pure devotee. But for one to be on a standard of taking that pure devotional service when one comes in contact with a pure devotee, one should be on a certain platform. But there are a lot of exceptions, because devotional service can elevate even a person who is in the platform of vikarma also. But for people in general, the Lord has created many such religious systems so that they don't fall down to the platform of vikarma, but at least adhere to certain religious standards so that they have hope for progress in future. And in the next aspect of the verse, Sanat Kumaras are speaking about simple living and high thinking. So with the adherence to practice of Krishna consciousness through the 64 principles, one will actually lose taste for all material sense gratification and living a simply by focusing ourselves on the aspect of progressing in Krishna consciousness, we can prioritize the most important things in life. So if we are surrounded with opulence, if we are surrounded with too many distractions, it is difficult for a sadhaka to practice in Krishna consciousness without any distractions. Bhogaishwarya prasaktanam tvaya apahrita chetasam. One's consciousness will be hijacked, kidnapped. Vyavasayadmika buddhi samadhauna vidiyate. And therefore one will not be able to concentrate on the ultimate goal, that is Krishna Prem. And therefore to create an environment around us that is favorable for Krishna consciousness, we should prioritize to live simply in a simple living without actually too much attachment to opulence. And a devotee also tolerates whatever situation he is facing. So here we see that every virtue, that is every quality that is described by Sanat Kumaras to Prithu Maharaj, is actually linked to another qualities. So Sanat Kumaras in this context are not saying that by practice of devotional service one will develop these qualities. That is definitely there, but in this particular context Sanat Kumaras are saying that by practicing these qualities one's devotional service becomes pleasing to the Supreme Lord. So these are two ways. One is by practicing devotional service these qualities also start appearing in the practitioner, but one should also endeavor to acquire these qualities because these qualities are pleasing for the Supreme Lord. And therefore time and again Lord Krishna has explained even in Bhagavad Gita these qualities multiple times. In the 13th chapter, the 26 items of knowledge also Lord Krishna speaks about many of these qualities. In 16th chapter, Daivi Sampada also the Supreme Lord speaks about these qualities, which means the Lord actually is pleased with the devotee who has these qualities. Ahimsa, following in the footsteps of previous Vaishnava acharyas, remembering the Supreme Lord, adherence to religious principles and regulative principles in the process of bhakti, controlling our senses, abandoning material desires and regulating them for the pleasure of the Lord and transforming them into spiritual desires, not blaspheming other religious systems, living with the simple standards of life with prominent focus and priority on practicing Krishna consciousness, and receiving anything that comes in life with a tolerating mentality. So when one actually imbibes these qualities, then such a person's devotional service becomes very pleasing to the Supreme Lord, because these qualities help a devotee to rise to the platform of goodness. And in goodness, we can actually execute devotional service without any distractions, without any diversions or deviations, because in the platform of goodness, one is in Sukham and Jnanam. So in that platform, one can actually perform devotional service without any deviation. But for us to reach that platform, we should also try to acquire these qualities, because these qualities are pleasing to the Supreme Lord. So in this verse, we discussed about Sanat Kumara speaking about the qualities that a devotee actually should have, which pleases the Supreme Lord. So they start speaking about ahimsa, and real ahimsa we discussed is not simply not hurting others, but endeavoring to spiritual elevation of all living entities, or not arresting the spiritual progress of living entities. And when can a devotee elevate the consciousness of other living entities? When that devotee follows the instructions of spiritual master, then compassion arises in his heart by the practice of devotional service, and by that he can actually exhibit ahimsa. And by following in the footsteps of previous acharyas, one will be able to remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. By execution of regulative principles, one will arise from the platform of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti to Raganuga platform, and then eventually progress in Krishna consciousness. But that can happen only when the devotee controls his senses and abandons material desires. And by doing so, one should not blaspheme other religious systems or others, and should make sure that one's environment is favorable for Krishna consciousness by practicing the standards of simple living and high thinking, and one should tolerate. So by doing this, one can actually, the compassion in the heart of a living entity can arise, and by that, that living entity will endeavor for elevation of Krishna consciousness for all living entities. So with this, I would like to conclude today's discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto, 22nd chapter, and verse number 24. If devotees have any questions or any comments, I would request them to please place them forward. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Dandavat pranams. Hare Krishna. Nice
Hare
class.
Krishna
Hare
Mataji.
Krishna.
You should my humble obeisances.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So if devotees do not have any questions, then we will conclude for today. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय।
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.